So you want to get into oil painting, but you have no idea what supplies you need and where you should spend your money versus save it. Well, I'm going to go over just that today and some supplies you probably already have inside your house. Welcome to my channel. My name is Carly, and if you're watching this, then you are watching my first ever video. Super exciting. Anyways, the first thing I'm gonna go over today is what paint you need, because obviously the most important part. So you actually only need 6 tubes of paint. You don't have to go out and buy a whole set, even if they seem like a bargain. Really, the 6 colors that I'm gonna show you are all you need. So first, I have a 200 milliliter tube of soft mixing white. This is by Winsor & Newton, and trust me, you're probably gonna want a bigger thing of white than the rest of the colors I'm gonna show you, because it goes fast. The first one is Alizarin Crimson. This one is by Grumbacher. The rest are by Winsor & Newton. I have French Ultramarine Blue, Cadmium Yellow Light, Cerulean Blue, and Cadmium Red Light. So they don't look very pleasant, and trust me, it's gonna be really hard to keep them looking pretty, so I wouldn't be concerned with that. If you're wondering why I don't have a black or a neutral like raw umber, it's because it's pretty easy to mix a color close to either of those, and if you could save the money here and there, then I would rather spend a little bit extra time to mix the paint than to go buy a whole tube. And you'll hear a lot of artists say, you know, never use black straight out the tube, which it can be useful, but for the purpose of this video, we're just talking about how to spend the least amount of money, and that you can do without. Now that I've gone over the paints, I'm going to talk about what painting mediums you need. Neo-Magilp is going to be pretty much essential. This is what you use to thin down the paint because oil paint is so thick. So I just put this on my palette with the rest of the paints and mix it in if I want a thin wash of color or to use the scumbling technique. Now, refined linseed oil, you're gonna need either way, but is absolutely essential if you have a wooden palette, which I will show you in a second why. But this also acts as your brush dip in between colors. So you just dip your brush into it and then wipe it off on a towel, and the color should come off with no problem. Now I will show you why the linseed oil is so important. I'm sure you can see the shine that is coming off of this. This is because the board has been seasoned with the refined linseed oil over time. And if you don't use it, then your palette will look something like this. The wood really wants to absorb that pigment, and it's gonna be almost impossible to mix your colors. It's almost like it just disappears into the palette as you're working with it. And it's also just gonna be very dry and hard to scrape off the paint if you don't put enough linseed oil before you start. It's also what you use to clean your palette off when you're done. I usually use the leftover oil from my brush dip and just rub it off, and that is how the paint comes off. However, if you do not want to spend the money on a wooden palette, a great alternative that you probably already have is a glass sheet from an old picture frame or something like that. This is really great because it's a lot easier to clean. You don't need that oil like the wood palette does. However, it is of course easier to break. Additionally, whatever you have underneath the glass is going to kind of affect how you're mixing the colors, but that shouldn't be a problem if you just put something neutral underneath it, like a piece of cardboard. I do not recommend a plastic palette for oil colors. It is possible to clean, but it's going to take a lot more elbow grease, and I would rather you just not struggle with that, because you should want to spend the majority of your time doing the actual painting rather than the cleanup. Maybe this is obvious to some people, but if you are a beginner, you also do not want to use a palette that has divots in it like this. This is more useful for watercolors or acrylics. The reason for this is you're mostly using the palette knife to mix your colors rather than the brushes. You're mostly using the brushes to mix your colors once you're in a late stage of refinement. That's when you're making the different values within each color. Now, speaking of the palette knives, I just use this one by Master's Touch. I got it Hobby Lobby. It's really not that expensive, but if you're really on a budget, then they usually have these little plastic ones in those like $6 brush kits you can get at Hobby Lobby or Michael's. It just might be harder to clean, like we said, with the palettes. Now, I'm not going to get into all the names of the brushes because that could just honestly be a little bit overwhelming. Depending on how large of a painting you are starting with and how advanced you already are in the art, 2 brushes should be sufficient for starting out if you're just dipping your toes in. If you are more advanced, then of course feel free to get more, but you're going to need at least 1 flat brush and 1 thinner brush. I use synthetic ones. These are from Blick Studio. I'll put a link to all the brushes I use down below, as well as the materials I've mentioned previously. Then of course you're going to need some canvases or wood panels depending on what you want to work on. Just keep in mind that wood panels are going to be more expensive. You might hear some artists say, oh, you should stretch your own canvases, but really I don't have time for that, and I know a lot of other people also do not have the time for that. It might save you a little bit in the long run, but for me, simple canvases by Artist Loft work the best for me. I recommend not getting the value packs because they are pretty low quality, but again, if you're a beginner, you're just dipping your toes in, then that will be a great option for you. Now that I've gone over canvases and some of the other essential supplies you'll need to start oil painting, I want to talk a little bit about easels. Now, of course, anyone could paint flat on a desk. It might just hurt your neck after a while, but that said, it's not entirely essential. Now, if you do want to invest in it and you're pretty confident that you want to keep oil painting or painting in general, then it's going to depend on what size you're usually working with. A little tabletop easel like this is going to be really inexpensive. It only holds about an 8x10 canvas though, or 10x10. However, I'll recommend some other types because there are some that are meant for outdoors or only displaying the canvases, as I've figured out the hard way. So I'll put one that is going to be good for just working at home if you're casual. Of course, if you're going to be a full-time artist, then you'll want to get something higher end, but that's not what we're talking about in this video. Now, that's all the stuff you might have to invest in, but luckily there are a lot of things that you probably already have. The first one is simply a little glass or container. This is going to be for your brush dip. The linseed oil will go in here. You will want to fill it up, that way you have enough space where your brush isn't going to touch the bottom or sides when you put it in. So you just put the brush in there, don't swish it around or anything. It just loosens up that oil paint that is on the brush, and then you wipe it off on a towel, which is the next item that you probably already have. I just used an old dish towel, and you might want to keep it in a container that has a lid, because if the oil paint left on it is exposed to air, it could cause a hazard. So I'm using an old coffee tin for that. Now, the last item that you can't do without is going to be simply some dish soap and water to clean your brushes. You can just use that same little container we talked about, put some dish soap in there, and then swirl your brushes around, rinse the brushes with water and repeat as needed. You don't have to start by rinsing the brushes under the water because it's going to take more time, it's just inefficient, and it wastes the water ultimately. So hopefully this video summed up what you absolutely are going to need if you want to start oil painting. Of course, there are a lot of other supplemental items you can get along the way if you continue, but this is just the bare bones. If you have any other questions, leave a comment. In my next video, I'll be talking about how you can do your setup and your cleanup in the most efficient way. That way some of the tips I mentioned throughout this video can actually be put to use. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video and you found it helpful, leave a like, subscribe, comment. I'm gonna be doing more videos that are helpful like this, tutorials, just showing my paintings, things like that. So thank you for watching again, and I hope you all have a good day. Bye.